Good evening and welcome to Screentone Club, episode 47. We're recording this on the 22nd of March 2020 for release on the 24th of March 2020. We're coming to you live from the socially distant lands of Scotland, and joining me is my socially distant co-host, Mr. Andy Hanley. How you doing, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I've been very sociable. I've been going around, I've done some fishing, I've caught some butterflies, I've shaken some trees till money falls out of them.
You're just playing Animal Crossing, aren't you? Come on.
Yes, I've been converted to the world of Animal Crossing, so yeah, that has been the perfect game for this point in time, because it's very sociable and outdoorsy and all the things that we can't do normally, so it's, well timed Nintendo, as it turns out. Yeah,
I think the combination of releasing Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing was a good idea. There's crossover potential there for sure. But yeah, I haven't played Animal Crossing. I haven't played one for a long time, but putting it on the Switch is a smart move. Like, that seems like the perfect form factor to have it in a thing you can kind of lug around and walk around the house with.
Yeah, indeed. I think that the term perfect Switch game is kind of tired and overused at this point, but Animal Crossing still absolutely fits that that descriptor.
Oh, totally. For my place, I bought I bought Assassin's Creed Origins, which is a giant glob of content, but also very pretty. It's very nice and pretty, and I don't know, it's weird. It's a weird thing where they could have gone earlier in the whole Egyptian civilization. I'd have liked that, but whatever. It's a game where you do the knifey in people. So
yeah, you've now got me thinking about the possibility of Animal Crossing Origins set in ancient Egypt, but that's a whole other podcast probably.
Assassin's Crossings something, I don't know, Eternal, fuck it, Rising, video game name. Cool. So, even though the shops are empty of stuff like eggs, who the hell panic buys eggs? Knock it off. Also toilet paper. But one thing that isn't in short supply is manga, especially if you buy it digitally like I do. So this is your manga podcast for this fortnight. And as everyone's kind of cooped up and going bananas, when you have a podcast, everything looks like a podcast shaped hole. And so we're going to be trying to release a few bonus episodes to help keep people sensible during this trying time of being socially isolated, and or possibly much worse if your employer is a jerk. I hope they aren't, because that sucks. But first and foremost, we're going to announce our Patreon bonus episode for March. Yes, we have a Patreon, like every podcast out there. For all the mere sum of $1 a month, you can support us, and that would be greatly appreciated, because it helps defer the cost of the manga we review. And we're quite close to getting to our next milestone, where we will start doing 2 bonus episodes a month, which we're going to do temporarily anyway, because we're big softies. So the topics for the Patreon bonus episodes for March, because we're going to do 2 of them. One of them will be free for everyone, and one will be for patrons only, just to keep it special. So the patron only episode will be on the light novel Kizu Monogatari by Nisio Isin, which I've read before and greatly enjoy, but I'm going to enjoy even more talking about it with you, Andy. Hooray! Yeah. I was expecting a snappy comeback, but there we go. That's it.
No, I got nothing for that. But yeah, like I've also read that before, and yeah, like, you know, I'm all in on reading that again. So sure, good choice, everyone.
Yeah, I had one person recommend the audiobook to me, which I've heard a lot of good things about. We'll see if I can find it in my budget to get that as well. But our second bonus episode is on the manga series Horimiya. You're as surprised as I am that people actually voted for a manga. But this is a romance series, kind of light comedy. I'm a fan of it, but I also haven't read it in about a year, so going back to it now for the podcast seems like a good way to jam it in there. Very light, fluffy, very kind of enjoyable romantic comedy from what I remember of it, at least. We'll see.
Cool. Yeah, that one's been on my list for a very long time. Like, I think it's pretty much been on I should read this and pick it for the podcast at some point since we started doing this. So, again, as with all things in life, if you wait long enough, it'll get fixed for you. So there you go.
Yeah, in my case, as I say, I haven't read a volume for a while, and then I checked how many volumes I'm behind and went, ooh. So we'll have to see. At some point, that series makes a big jump from just being about the principal 2 characters to being about the extended cast as well, and then it gets kind of gnarly trying to remember who the hell everyone is when they release infrequently. It's a case of, oh man, who are all these people again? Shit. Oh god. Dear. And also on the Patreon bent, shout outs as always to Mr. Rob Jessup, who very kindly supports us at the $12 a month tier, and so gets shouted out on this podcast. Thank you very much, Rob. Moving on to the next part of our show is Returning Champions, which we don't have anything really. But I have a quick shout out is that I have bought another few volumes of Ranma Half. I'm now up to volume 10. Continues to be good. The way that series just continues to add in more weird characters and kind of just like become more and more stupid really kind of works in a way where, you know, it brings back old characters for new stupid hijinks. It brings in new characters for even stupider hijinks. It kind of just keeps going. It's a sort of series where, like, at the end of it, you look back and go, what the buggering hell happened here? Like, why is the cast a cast of thousands? And how did all this stupid crap happen? And then you realize it happened very slowly over the course of volumes. But yeah, it's still got Shampoo, and I still like Shampoo as a character, so that's all right. You know, you need a Chinese girl with strange pidgin English in the series. But yeah, good fun. That Ranma Half. Okay, so moving on to the main part of our show. Do you want to perhaps take the lead on this, Andy, since I keep grabbing the microphone for this episode?
Yep, sure thing. I can indeed go first. Yeah, so my pick for this particular episode is Volume 1 of Given, which is a Yaoi series published by Sublime. And it's a series that mostly came to my attention via its anime adaptation, because it kind of it's one of those things where, like, you know, I saw the trailers, knew it existed, and was like, yeah, it looks nice, like, animation-wise. But it got a lot of, it was really hot in the anime sphere, like, once that started airing. Like, I know a lot of people who were really sort of boosting that show. And it then got a follow-up movie, which I think is coming next year, probably, or maybe the end of this year. So it kind of came to my attention from that. And then, of course, I heard that the source material was getting an English an English translation. So I figured, why not give it a look and check it out. And so Given is basically music based in a lot of ways. So the main character is a young lad called Uenoyama, who is a talented guitar player. Like, you know, he's kind of a natural at it, you know, ever since he sort of picked up a guitar. Like, he's one of those people that can just kind of like pick up a song and just play it incredibly well right off the bat, which in a sense is perhaps also his weakness, because it seems like the better he gets at playing the guitar, the less he cares about it. So he's kind of now at the point where he's a good player, like, he's part of a band, but he kind of doesn't really care about it. It's just a thing he does because he can. And that kind of starts to change when he meets somebody called Mafio Sato, who is a very taciturn and odd kid who is also goes to his school. And he kind of like just meets him just randomly, kind of effectively hogging his kind of hiding place, like in a school corridor, the typical delinquent hideout of like just on the stairs up to the roof of the school, which I want to know if that's a real thing in Japanese schools or not. Like, do people always hang out there? Because they sure do in anime and manga. But anyway, this Sato is just kind of sat there just like hugging a guitar, doesn't really want to talk, but kind of it eventually becomes clear that despite clutching this guitar constantly, like, he doesn't actually know how to play it, and seemingly doesn't really know anything much about music. And so kind of from a weird sort of fascination with him, Uenoyama sort of ends up taking Sato under his wing. Turns out, like, he's actually got some talent of his own, not least when it comes to singing. And so he kind of ends up being invited in a rather circuitous way to join Uenoyama and his colleagues' band. And clearly, given the genre of this, like, there's relationship stuff that is kind of starting to swirl around from the outset, not just between Uenoyama and Sato, but also like the other bandmates, Kaji and Halaki rather, who also kind of have their own thing going on. And of course, this being kind of romantic drama fare, Sato has some dark secrets from his past that are starting to emerge as this first volume goes on. Like, we kind of find out the origins of this random guitar he's been holding, why he has it, why he maybe kind of holds it dear, and there's kind of rumours, etc., swirling around that as well. And I'm actually really curious to hear what you make of this first volume, Elliot, because there are things that I like about this series. Like, I particularly I like its presentation, particularly when it comes to kind of the musical side of things. It has sort of an energy and a certain brashness to it that I really like. I'm kind of curious about the relationships and the characters, and I am sort of interested in watching them develop. But there is also kind of a side of it which may be personal to me, in that I feel like I've read and watched so many of these kinds of series where it's like, oh, like character X can't really communicate well with people, but he can or she can through music. And I feel like I've maybe seen too many series at this point that kind of go through the same motions of, kind of emotionally stunted, or kind of, character that can't communicate joins a band and learns, etc., power of friendship, love, whatever it may be. And that's kind of the side of it that I'm maybe struggling with a bit at this point, that it feels like some of its ground is too well trodden on for me. And there's very much a feeling when I got to the end of this volume, it's like, oh, it's another one of these then.
Yeah, I maybe come at it from a slightly different angle, where I can see what you mean. I mean, first things first, like, as you say, the series has a great flair, which it has a great flair for presentation and getting things across to you. And there's a couple of really good 2-page spreads where it kind of bursts out of its own skin almost, in a way of it very powerfully showing you what is happening with the characters. And when Sato starts singing the first time, it was a case of, oh, okay, that was what that first moment kind of took the series beyond its initial start and made me kind of sit up a bit more and pay attention to it more, rather than just going, oh, okay. One thing I must say, as also as a side thing, is that all the lads in this are tall as fuck. They're all like 6 foot-ish. And as a tall person, I can totally get down with this representation, even if it makes it very confusing trying to figure out people's ages, where, Uenoyama is 16 and his bandmates are like 20 and 22. And so it's a case of like, can't quite tell who's old and who's not and where people are. Like, thank goodness for the, character profiles, showing you and telling you about them, which actually kind of is, I feel they feel almost vital in providing you the background information you need just to get a little more information out of the characters. Less so on Sato's point, because Sato is kind of front and center and has a lot more sort of stuff around him to help clue you into him, like the fact that he's very, as you say, very taciturn, but he's more kind of soft rather than hard taciturn, where he's very dreamy, he's called spacey by other people, he has the effect of looking like a Pomeranian, and that kind of is a recurring gag, which I can kind of get behind because it's cute. But for me, I don't mind the whole power of love and friendship music thing, mostly because I'm someone for whom rhythm and musicality does not work. Like, I really wish I can't even clap in time, frankly. I suck garbage at it. But the one thing that I kind of came down on was, in between the kind of very interesting character relationships and developments and such, it feels like it's a series that wants to be maybe this is me again, but I really wish it didn't have the like yaoi manga stamp on it, because I feel like that holds it back, which maybe it's me trying to sound snooty or something, but basically, like, whenever I was getting into the series, it would have like a yaoi manga moment to break it up and make it kind of a lot more mundane, and just like kind of put it back in a box, as it were, rather than setting the characters and the environment free and letting it be an interesting romance story, where instead it had to do like these various yaoi bullet points of like, oh, jealous girl is gonna like dump on you and other things of that nature. And it feels hidebound almost by convention, of it being in this genre of being a yaoi manga. And it's that sort of stuff that kind of breaks up the flow, especially with the characters. Like, there are some moments that are kind of like interesting, but I feel like it's constantly got an eye on trying to like keep like fans of the genre on the hook. Which I think I've gotten that across, but does that kind of tally, Andy, or am I kind of alone in that? But
yeah, I mean, I think the thing that strikes me about that, specifically around Uenoyama and Sato's relationship, is that it kind of tries to build that stuff too quickly, I think, is its
totally.
issue. Like, I don't have a problem with kind of the relationship angle or the way it does it, but I feel like particularly in Uenoyama's kind of case, like, as he sort of sort of wrestling with his feelings, that feels like stuff that should be starting to come forward at the very end of this first volume, if at all. And it kind of feels like by the time you get a few chapters into this, he's already having this like, oh, why am I so drawn to this person? Which kind of... It feels against his character as well, I think, which kind of compounds that, because he doesn't feel like the kind of person that would necessarily instantly glom on to anybody. Like, he's kind of, like, quite distant and aloof in a lot of ways, and I can kind of see what they're going for in terms of like, oh, this person is kind of fascinating in a way that breaks down all of those barriers, but it still feels like it does it too instantaneously. I mean, for my part, like, I kind of found that the relationship I was actually more interested in is between the other two band members, like
totally.
Keiji and Haruki's deal. It's like, there's clearly like, they're childhood friends, like you say, they're in their 20s, as it turns out, thanks character profiles. And like, those two have a really interesting deal where, you know, they've clearly known each other for a long time, and there's this actually pretty fantastic kind of simmering kind of sexual tension undercurrent that is kind of going on in a way where you can't tell whether one or both of them are aware of it or kind of really what the deal is there. And like, there was definitely a point in this volume where I was like, I just kind of want a spin-off with just these two guys and like seeing what their deal is. And I'm sure they'll, given what's been put forward here, I'm sure there'll be plenty of that in future volumes. But like, that was the one, if I'd have had like the camera quote unquote at that point, I would absolutely have kind of grabbed it and just forcibly shifted it in the direction of those two, because I found their kind of the rapport between those two and what was going on with them was way more interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm totally on board with you. I think the thing that that they do that the other relationship don't is that it just happens. Like they let it sort of simmer, and you see them both having their little asides, and they talk to each other very candidly, and you get to do the whole like, oh, I wonder what's going on here. Like, is this maybe? Who knows? And you know, Uenoyama's sister, who might as well be two different characters, given the fact she does the whole transformation. Like, she's basically an Umaru, and she, you know, kind of hangs out with one of them, and it you know, jealousy / confusion, you know, Doshio type dealy. Whereas with Sato and Uenoyama is that it constantly feels the need to just like state things outright or just slam like plot developments in your face, when having it slowly unearth as time goes on is much more interesting. And also it seems to be doing that at the same time. So even though there is this gradual unearthing of Sato's like baggage, and he has some rather strange conversations with another band member as he's sort of working through it and kind of like basically spitting in his face and saying, oh, you want me to talk about love, eh? How about this? And it's like, whoa, kid. And it's that sort of like back and forth or combination where, because the Uenoyama, like storyline keeps having hard moments of like severe quote unquote capital P plot development, it really kind of ruins the pacing, even though there is also the fact that, you know, Uenoyama himself, like he's the protagonist character, he's the main point of view character, but he's also a complete prickly idiot who is basically oblivious to himself being a real handful. And like, that sort of thing is interesting, but as I say, because it's all these hard moments that keep popping up in the series, it really undercuts like the slow boil development that would be more interesting to see, which is again why the other two band members are more interesting as a get out clause of like, I wish I was seeing their relationship, because it seems way better handled even already.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a shame as well, because actually, like, I think if I break down the step by step of Uenoyama and Sato's relationship, like, I am interested in that relationship and all of the story beats that progress that. It's just that they came at me too fast and too soon, and I think had I had more time to kind of get comfortable with those characters and see that develop a bit more slowly, like I'd have been way more on the hook for it. But instead, yeah, like you say, it felt like it almost every chapter it had to drop in a moment of just a like, hey, here's the next kind of twist in the tale between these two, and you know what their deal is. And yeah, like some of that stuff really could have done with some more time to breathe and to kind of percolate than it gets.
Yeah, especially given like the main element of quote unquote Sato's deal is that, like, that's the sort of thing that would be interesting to stretch out over multiple volumes. And like, we've had so many like hard moments dumped in our plates that it's like, oh, okay, you've you've kind of already spent your like dramatic potential on part of this by just shoving it in my face rather than letting it boil. But also at the same time, like the series is quite nice. Like the characters all look good. You can see there's a lot of good expressions. The female cast kind of look like dudes with slightly more restrained haircuts, which is weird, where the boys have the totally flamboyant haircuts and the girls are just kind of plain. I don't know. It's weird. But yeah, it's an interesting series, and I'm almost tempted to go and continue it just to see how it handles. I mean, as you say, like I kind of just want to see, Haruki and like the other guy, characters. Kaji, yes. Yeah. They don't say their names out loud that often. I need to reread the character profiles, but yeah, I wish there was more time to kind of get them two fleshed out, because they are a really fascinating pair, even if at times I have to tell them apart using their piercings. Which I think is a common thing in this series, is you zoom in on piercings to figure out who they are. It's like anime girl hair, but for boys.
Yeah, I fully suspect that is the case. But yeah, like I do hope that those characters get as much kind of time in the spotlight as I'm assuming they will, given this first volume. But I know I've thought that before about other series, and then kind of the interesting characters get sidelined. So maybe I'm just building myself up for a fall there. But yeah, it's a strange one for me, because like, there's definitely a part of me that wants to read future volumes of this and see where the story and where these relationships go. But there is also the side of it that just feels like it just hasn't done anything to break itself out of the other similar series that I've seen in this kind of mold. And I just wanted it to just have one unique thing that would just be like, okay, this has kind of sold me that this isn't going to follow the same cadence as all of the others. So definitely one I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts as kind of future volumes become available. Or perhaps people who've watched the anime and kind of knows where it goes, to see whether it maybe sort of breaks outside of that formula a little bit. Cause there's definitely a fair amount that I like or want to like here. There just wasn't quite enough for me to be a definite like, oh yeah, I'm totally on board to carry on reading this.
So yeah, for me, I would like to see a bit more just slow burn development. Like I think the series has definitely, like, it has the characters, and I like the characters, and I'd be happier if it had a slightly slower burn on its development. I mean, one thing as well is that, like, outside of these big plot elements that keep being dumped on the characters, is that their entire school life is extremely ephemeral, and that's also part of the reason why it's so confusing to figure out where the other two band members are from. Kaji and I forgot his name again. Haruki, thank you. Sorry, Jesus, the Elliot Page naming problem strikes again. But yeah, the fact trying to figure out where they are as well. Like I say, had to read the profiles to figure out their university students. But they, the sort of what's around all the characters and what they are otherwise doing would be interesting to flesh out. Like there's a whole bit where they basically, like the three band members basically bully or pressure, Sato into getting a part-time job, and then it kind of weirdly drops that, and then there's an omake where it kind of fills in what his part-time job is, because it was unclear in the volume itself, and like the characters even apologize at that point for it as well. It's like, well, I appreciate you filling this in, but maybe if you know that you're making this a bit vague, maybe you can just take your time and build it up rather than having to go, oh shit, I didn't explain anything. There's the whole fact that Uenoyama like is good at basketball, but we don't get any time with that, and it just feels like this sort of thing that's almost like a fun little side project drawing thing for the author, which is where it kind of feels extremely superfluous.
Yeah, and those are strange moments that other series would pull out for a few chapters and kind of make the most of. Because especially like the part-time job thing, when that kind of came up in the narrative, I was like, okay, well this could actually be a really interesting few chapters of kind of like watching, like, how Sato copes with, the job application and interview process. Like it might give some insight into kind of, what he's like or what he's interested in outside of, what he's actually been doing thus far. Like it feels like, okay, it's it's been done a million times before in other manga, the whole we have to get a part-time job to afford instruments, etc., etc. But it is also something that can be played as insightful character building or comedy or whatever you want to do with it. It's quite a ripe little thing outside of the main storyline to spend some time with and do some building with. And yeah, I think likewise kind of Uenoyama's basketball thing, you could have an interesting little subplot about kind of that and, why is he more into music in his band still than basketball, because this is a series that sets up from the get-go that he's kind of, music has lost its sheen for him, so why is he still in this band and not going all in on basketball? There are interesting questions that get set up by those little moments but then just kind of don't actually get answered at all.
Well, it's also part of what kind of set me up for a fall with the synopsis, where the synopsis flat out mentions that he can play music but he's lost its shine, he played basketball but it's lost its shine, and he's looking for something else to help rekindle it. And it's cool, maybe you can show a bit more of that in the series. I don't know, you see it more on the music side, but you only see the aftermath where him meeting with Sato kind of weirdly kicks him in the arse, even though he himself is not fully recognizing it, because again he's a person who's blind to himself, which is interesting because that's the one thing that's perhaps most interesting and at least touched on in this, at least directly. So I'm sure there's plenty of material ripe there for development later if they decide to do so. But yeah, it's just I feel like it's a series where I want to like it more, and I feel like there is definitely something here to dig for. But it is a case of, man, I don't want to get all excited about stuff that might not actually be done at all in future volumes.
Yeah, for sure. I might actually just be tempted just to kind of, and again, I don't know how much of this material it burns through, but I might actually just be tempted to watch the anime adaptation as kind of a quick way of just getting through some of that and seeing what it has to offer. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one. Like pretty much everything we pick here. Definitely glad I read it. Definitely some stuff that's if you listen to us talk about this and think that no, this all sounds pretty good, then I think you'll have a good time with it. But yeah, there's definitely kind of question marks here that maybe future volumes will answer, but it also hasn't done enough to convince me that oh no, I definitely need to pick up future volumes to see if it gets to it.
Oh no, totally. Yeah, for me, it just hasn't quite set itself up quite. Yeah, it hasn't set its stall out quite as resplendently as I was hoping, which is a strange thing to say. I mean, also one thing to note, side note, is it did break the top 20 manga sales, overcoming a sea of Demon Slayer, My Hero Academia volumes, and that sort of thing. So it did pretty well to break the top 20 when you have so many weird bangers going on. So good job to the series.
Yeah, also pretty impressive for a series that isn't through, what you'd maybe normally call one of the biggest publishers. It's not a Viz Media or a Yen Press or whatever. So Sublime have their own good kind of imprint going on, but they're maybe not quite in the same tier you'd imagine in terms of kind of having the connections. So for it to ramp up the charts through that is actually genuinely impressive.
I thought Sublime was an imprint of Viz.
Maybe it is. Maybe you're right. Actually,
I think it's I think it is a sort of combination of Viz and another company, and that's why it's spit out rather than an imprint. It's its own company.
Well, that would explain that. In that case, I retract that comment.
Well, no worries. It's still kind of correct. Quick thing to note is the series is not yet complete. It's got 5 volumes in Japan and 1 volume currently in English. You can buy it digitally from Kobo or from Sublime themselves, and they just give you a friggin' PDF. Foolishly, I bought it from Sublime, forgot to download the PDF, and then went and bought it from Kobo, so I bought this thing twice. Maybe that's colouring my judgment of it somewhat, because I've paid for it twice.
Maybe that's their strategy all along, of we'll sell you it once, you'll forget you have it, and then we can sell it to you again.
Yes, we'll only sell manga to extremely forgetful morons. But yeah, so you can get it through either of those sites, and I believe it is physically available, but I haven't seen it. So, but yeah, Sublime do good work, and one thing I'll admit, I feel like I have to shout this out every time that we mention Sublime, but they have a really good community there, and it has one of the few examples of good comments on a video on a website ever. So people are very supportive there. It's quite pleasant. So yeah. And they've always been.
If only the rest of the internet could learn from their example.
Yeah, we just need to transplant that into YouTube somehow. Oh dear. So yeah, that's Given Volume 1. So yeah, Right, and so moving on to my pick for this episode, it is another romance series, slightly more vanilla, I suppose, more boring, is A Side Character's Love Story. It's by Akane Tamura. It's being published by North Star Pictures, the people who brought you Wakikozake, very important. It's not currently complete. It's at 6 volumes in Japan. It's up to 2 volumes in English, and there's another one coming out next month, which at this point would be April 2020. So, you can buy it from most digital platforms. I haven't seen a physical version of it yet. I don't know if North Star Pictures are releasing it physically, but I will take a look. Either way, A Side Character's Love Story is about a character called, I actually wrote names down because I always forget, is Tanaka Nobuko. Nobuko sounding much like Mobuko, as in mob character, as in Mob Psycho 100, basically. And she is an extremely, rather quiet, retiring, kind of plain-looking girl who is in her second year of university in the big city, and she works at a supermarket in for her spare time, part-time, for a bit of money, much like most students do. And she has a co-worker called Irie, I-R-I-E. I can never pronounce that. Irie, sorry. Right. I remembered it though. And Irie-kun is also extremely dull. He reminds me of Tamaki he reminds me of the glasses wearing one from Ouran High School Host Club. Suo. No, that's Tamaki again. Shit. What's his name? Shit. I need to Google this.
I can't help you with anything Ouran High School Host Club related, I'm afraid.
Really? You haven't seen it?
I watched enough of it to know I didn't like it.
Oh, okay, fine. Jesus. I really like that series. That's my problem, I suppose. There we are, Kyoya. That's it, Kyoya. The fucking, Shadow Emperor bastard. Anyway, he looks much like Kyoya, but he doesn't have an evil bone in his body. And he's an extremely sort of mundane-looking dude with close cropped black hair and a pair of wireframe glasses. But as it becomes apparent, even though she's very retiring, is that Nobuko has a bit of a thing for Irie, and she kind of sees herself as being very plain, very unremarkable, a side character in her own life, according to herself. And she has a number of sort of anxiety-based sort of tics and ailments, which the series points out and kind of highlights and puts into action. The picture of her on the cover, basically clenching her bag strap, is a pretty good short code for that. And so over the course of this volume, she slowly gets to know Irie, and kind of with the poking of the hyper genki new co-worker Abe, who in any other series would be the main character. Nobuko and Irie slowly kind of come to talk to each other more and share a few tender moments in an extremely mundane way. And it kind of develops from there. And I flat out just really love this series, because it does a lot of things that I love, and it does them really well, very slight character animation and character drawing. It has lots of good blushing. There's the main engine of misunderstandings are not between the characters, which I feel is important, but within the characters themselves, especially because you are mostly in Nobuko's head, and she will constantly second guess herself. She will dry run conversations. She will constantly simulate things and drive herself basically slightly just into an anxious mess about anything. And frankly, same. So seeing that kind of represented on the page, and where I could basically nod along like a idiot dog going, oh yeah, shit, this is exactly what I do. Christ. It really comes across. And it's also very pure, and there isn't really a competition to win the heart sort of thing. It's more a case of two individuals kind of coming to terms with their own possible romantic feelings and kind of slowly kind of inching towards each other with a very hearty dose of fear thrown in. And kind of just day-to-day mundanities of working in a supermarket where, it ain't the best job in the world, but the co-workers are nice, and, you can while away the hours doing it and you get paid. And so it kind of all gloms all that together where, it kind of it doesn't try and find new and exciting new avenues to explore for romantic possibilities. It's more a case of, well, we work together. We sometimes meet up outside of work. Maybe I'll ask him out, ? And it's that sort of at work, on the way home from work, that sort of space where they fit in their interactions rather than oh, let's go to, the theme park, which, I again really appreciate because it kind of it enhances the mundanity and kind of makes it special, where it kind of brings out these very sort of tender moments in like what would otherwise be boring and unremarkable, especially in a manga series when you want to try and keep readers coming back week after week, sort of thing. So that's kind of why I like it so much, and especially because I like the characters a great deal, because they're, as I say, really like lovely little sweetie pies and how they are so sort of withdrawn, but also like they're not like plain as in played up for comedy sort of thing, like in Penny Pony Dash or whatever. Like they are just normal characters, and it kind of uses that to just bring out the characters even more in what they do. Maybe it's just me who loves this thing to death, but what did you think of it, Andy?
No, I really, really enjoyed it as well. Like, I think it's pretty much for all of the reasons that you've just outlined. Like, I don't really have all that much to add beyond that, because yeah, I think it does such a good job of being kind of a sort of quiet and reserved sort of love story. Like, you know, we've talked about some pretty overblown kind of romantic dramas on this podcast, and you know, I think even some of the most sort of the most grounded romance series tend to feel a need at some point to inject some kind of like high tension or drama, and to the point where I was reading through this first one, kind of expecting it to do that at times. Like you say, you know, the new employee kind of Abe comes in, who's all outgoing, and it looks all set that like she's going to become some kind of love rival who's going to like, you know, snatch Ilie's attention because, you know, she's outgoing and cheerful and chatty, and you're like, oh, okay, I know where this goes. I've seen this a million times before. And it's like, no, she's not really interested in that way, and she's totally kind of, once she figures out what kind of Nobuko's deal is, she's totally like, oh no, you know, I'm kind of rooting for you, and that's all great. So, you know, all of that stuff, it's just really, it's a really enjoyable mundanity. Like, it all feels very relatable, and it kind of feels like if you wanted to make a documentary version of this, you could probably actually do it. There is probably some supermarket somewhere in Japan where this trio of characters could well be kind of, you know, just hanging around doing their job and, you know, having these kind of burgeoning romantic feelings for each other. So yeah, like that's something that I just really enjoyed about the whole thing. I mean, again, even Nobuko's kind of like, you know, social anxieties, as you mentioned, like very relatable, like very much feel like they're sort of possibly autobiographical from the author, because like they're just all so on point. And again, you compare that to other stuff we've talked about on here recently, like Komi Can't Communicate, where it kind of takes that sort of idea and just like ramps it up to 11 or 15 or higher than that. And like kind of in contrast to that, it's just really refreshing to see a series that just takes characters with those traits and just like, no, here's how they are. Like, it's not this like grand comedy of like, look how silly they are. It's not this kind of like, oh, you know, isn't this terrible? It's just like, hey, here's a person. This is their deal. These are their hang-ups. Let's just, you know, watch them leading their lives and maybe figuring some stuff out along the way. And so, yeah, I just really like the way this series just kind of thrives in that mundanity and kind of manages to make it work in its favour as a series with relatable characters that you just kind of end up rooting for because they're all just kind of good people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Irie, you know, he's like, it'd be quite easy to look at him and say, what a boring dude. But no, he has like a kindness to him, which comes through, again, through mundanities. Like there's one of the more sort of like weirdly heartfelt elements is, a kid has shown up at the supermarket and can't quite remember what they were supposed to buy for dinner. And like the two of them, Nobuko and Irie, kind of talk it through the kid, and like they have a conversation about potato croquet. And that's kind of it. Like that's the conversation, but it kind of shows a lot about the characters, and they kind of have a really earnest moment talking about what they want to eat for dinner. And again, it's mundane, it's small, but it really knows how to elevate that to make it kind of a case of, no, this is kind of how these things are built. Like you find out what people like to eat, and you like talk about their various tastes and likes and dislikes and things. And, you know, that kind of informs them, and it's that sort of mundanity rather than like, Kya, there's an angry hippo here. I don't know. Like I've been reading Nisekoi recently, and it's like the ultimate sort of counterpoint to Nisekoi, where 5 chapters in, there's already a Yakuza gang war of some kind, and I can't keep up with it whatsoever. But maybe that's just me. But yeah, no, as I say, I really enjoy these characters because, again, like the mundanity enhances them as individual characters. And there's also one character who shows up at the end who's Kaneko, who is Irie's sort of workmate, who also basically fills in the Abe-san sort of element from the other side, where he's also kind of elbowing Irie a bit, and he kind of comes into his own. Like, spoilers, I've read ahead to chapter volume 2, and like both Abe and Kaneko kind of put in good work as like good friends. And that's one part of this series as well that I enjoy, is that like it's not like they're in high school and they have their best buddy best friend as an emotional punching bag, like a la If I Could Reach You on hand always. It's a case of, well, you know, Nobuko moved to the city to go to university. She doesn't really have any old friends here, but she does have a co-worker who is not around all the time, but she's helping and pulling for her, sort of thing. And that kind of works. Like, it kind of removes this big sort of sort of leaning post for series to kind of fall back on, of the eternal best friend who is forever useful. And in this case, it's a case of, no, you got to figure this out, lass, and maybe your workmate will help you. That'd be nice. So it kind of works in that regard as well, because it makes it, you know, it's not fully adult, they're in university, but it kind of puts it into a bit more of a slightly more mature frame rather than, you know, fucking teenagers again.
Yeah, and that does give it some kind of refreshing little moments as well. I mean, like the whole idea of, it's not the typical high school of just like, oh, you know I'm going to see my classmates every day. It's like, you know, there are multiple occasions where Nobuko, you kind of see her going into shift and be like, oh, like, I wonder who I'm working with today. And it's like, oh, cool, or oh no, I'm working with X, depending on, you know, the situation at hand. And so that kind of, it adds some variety and adds a little frisson to things, because it's not always this expected, you know, who you're going to meet every day. It's that there's an element of kind of randomness to it, effectively, which I think kind of, you know, gives it a little bit extra. But yeah, I think that whole scene you mentioned where, there's kind of like, you know, the lost kid in the shop is a really good example of what makes me like this series, because I mean, you know, we've mentioned kind of like Nobuko has her various kind of, you know, hang-ups around various things, and it would be easy for this series just to make that a rod that she gets beaten with, that, oh, you know, she's always struggling because of these issues. But like, that's a really good example of kind of redressing the balance of like, hey, she's not like terrible at everything. Like, she's still a competent employee, which you kind of get to see through the series, through this volume. And she's also like, there are things that she's good at doing that other people who are working on their shifts aren't. Like, you know, you get to see like Ilya's not really so great with kids, but like, you know, she manages to handle it really well. And I think it's that kind of adds to the kind of the well-rounded feel of the cast. It's like they're not just pigeonholed into one, you know, like, here's the stupid but outgoing character, like, you know, here's the socially awkward character who will always mess it up. Like, there's a breadth of experience to all of them, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and that just kind of, you know, makes the whole thing as a whole work better. Yeah,
totally. And as you say, like, one thing as well that kind of hit me with you talking about the food scene again, where like Nobuko herself will talk happily, and she will happily talk about stuff, but it's only when she catches herself and like overanalyzes it and gives into her own internal voice that, you know, those things kind of go south. Which, again, same, like, hell, like, not to be too sort of up a bit much, but like, I one of the things I had to learn and went to therapy for was to learn not to keep trying to mind read people, because it sucks when you keep thinking that everything's going to go tits up every second of every day. Like, you and Nobuko does that ever so slightly in this, and it's a case of, yeah, I know, I've done that before, just you don't need to, don't worry, lass. So yeah, that sort of thing really kind of jumps off the page at me in particular. It really works. And it does do more of those whole Nobuko's quirks things in volume 2, but never enough to make it annoying or make it seem like it's running out its welcome, which is good, frankly.
That's cool. Because, like, this is definitely a series I can see myself. Like, it's weirdly, because it's not too dramatic, it's not the kind of series that I'm going to, like, rush out and buy a new volume every time it comes out straight away, because I have to know what happens. But it's definitely going to be one of those series that will always be, I think, on the back burner of just like, oh, there's a new volume of that, cool, like I'll check that out when I'm in the right mood for it. Because it definitely fills a hole that I absolutely needs to have filled sometimes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have volumes 3 and 4 on wishlist already to buy them when they come out, so I'm kind of jonesing for it. Like, I really I was kind of worried about doing this and having you not like it, or just going back to it to review it and picking it full of holes, because I really do love this series, like as if that's not obvious already for me gushing about it. But as I say, it just kind of fills this hole that I really enjoy of having two characters kind of work through themselves. It reminds me like of a much less wacky version of The World God Only Knows, when it had its more sensible, like original arcs, when it just had like Kamer and a character working through their shit. And that was always great fun. If a bit creepy because of the whole game aspect thing, but whatever. That series that series was way better than it had any right to be, frankly.
Yeah.
But yeah, oops, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, on top of that, I do also really like the character designs of this series as well. Like, I think it does a good job of kind of making the characters stand out, but again, it keeps them grounded and feeling like, you know, actual real humans and not weird caricatures of people. And I think that it just fits the tone perfectly. Like, it would be easy to go too far on the kind of, you know, funny faces or whatever you might want to do, kind of comedy bent. But it manages to just get it right. Like there are good faces, there are good reactions, etc., but they're always just on the right side of kind of being grounded alongside the characters themselves.
Totally, yeah. I feel like the single most outlandish character design is Abe, and even she only has like one or two little quirks to her design, and that's just because she's a very excitable little girl, and that kind of works. Like, you know, I appreciate the characters more because they are mundane in that way. Like I feel like I've looked at them more, if that makes sense, rather than just seeing their, like, you know, charm points, as it were, to use a phrase.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a side character's love story, available now if you so fancy. Cool. So, moving on to what we're going to be talking about next time. So we've both picked something to have a look at for next episode. I've picked a light novel because I want to inflict pain upon myself, but also I've seen a lot of people talking about this and I've never actually seen the anime or read anything to do with it. So I might as well jump in with both feet, but I have picked the first light novel volume of My Youth Romantic Comedy Is Wrong As I Expected. Is there a short version of that title? Because man alive, I'm never going to pronounce that correctly again.
I mean, everybody's basically gone to calling it by the shortened Japanese title of Origairu.
Oh, okay, Origairu. Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so you can be a weeb and call it Origairu if you like.
What do you mean can be a weeb? I've been a weeb for a decade or more. Come on, dude.
Well, okay, you can admit to being a weeb and call it that.
People at work already know it's too late. It's too late. Okay, how about you, Andy?
So my pick is Kakushi Goto Volume 1, which is a new series from Koji Kometa, the author of Joshulaku and Sayonara Zetsubou Sensei. Two series that I kind of hold quite dear in different ways, certainly from their anime adaptations. Sadly, never got the source material for those, so I figured I wanted to check that one out.
Man, yeah, I should make us read Sayonara Zetsubou Sensei, because you can buy that digitally now. I'll put that in my document to torture us with later.
That's a weird time machine of a series to go back to at this point in time, I suspect.
Yeah, I have no idea if the references hold up or if it's just going to be extremely confusing. But yeah, so yeah, cool. I saw people posting screenshots of Kakushi Goto, and so I'm interested to see that. So yeah, it'd be cool. Cool. So thank you very much for listening. This has been your episode of Screentone Club. You can find out all the rest of our episodes and show notes at the website, screentone.club. If you do like the podcast, please consider telling a friend, tweeting about it, etc. That stuff really helps with getting the word out there. If you want to talk to us on Twitter, you can at Screentone Club, or one word. You can also email us at show@screentone.club. My name's Elliot Page, as mentioned. You can find me at Elliot Page on Twitter, and you can also find a short video game me and a friend made at questionable.systems, because we love stupid URLs. And Andy, how about you?
You can probably find me not tweeting because I'm too busy playing Animal Crossing at Hannah's1979.
I mean, surely that's the more healthier behaviour anyway, isn't it? Come on.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm surprised that Animal Crossing doesn't have its own social network at this point, but no, just a bulletin board.
No, don't. That'll poison it. Come on. Like, you'll just get people, like, subtweeting each other. Can you imagine Animal Crossing characters subtweeting each other? That'd be horrible. Like, it would break the illusion.
Yeah, have you seen that guy's flower arrangement? It sucks.
Yeah, fuck that toucan. Fuck him. Like, whoa. Anyway, so, thank you very much for listening, and good night.
Bye, everyone.